This is Matt Skellenger at onlinemusiclab.com. Today our lesson is going to be the major triad. If you've taken the lesson previously about the major scale, the major triad comes from the major scale. And the easiest way to understand that is that the major triad comes from playing the first, third, and fifth note of the major scale. A major triad is a chord, or a three-note chord. Most of the time, bass players don't play all of those notes together at the same time, like a guitar player or a keyboard player, but a bass player would play those notes one note at a time. So, we're going to look at the shape for the major triad, we're going to relate it to the major scale, and then we're going to play some exercises using the major triad. Last time when we talked about the major scale, we were basing it off of the third fret of our A string, but with the idea that this could be anywhere on our bass, we just happened to pick the third fret on our A string. We're going to use that same scale shape, so if I do the scale starting on the third fret of my A string, if you remember from the previous lesson, the major scale is going to be fingers 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, or backwards, 4, 3, 1, 4, 2, 1, 4, 2. So, with that fingering, now if I assign the scale degree numbers to our scale, the major scale is a 7-note scale, starting with a root or our 1, then we have scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then our octave, which is the same note as our 1, but higher in pitch. So backwards would be 8 or 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now if we take the first, third, and fifth note of the major scale, it will sound like this. Here's my first note, here's my third note, here's my fifth note. So right now, what I'm playing is root or 1, third scale degree, and fifth scale degree. Another way of thinking about that is we play the 1, we skip the 2, play the 3, skip the 4, play the 5. This is the universal fingering for a major triad, or a 3-note major chord. Probably the most commonly used chord in music, the major triad. If we look at it visually, if you're having trouble with the scale degree relationships and relating it to the major scale, another way of looking at it is, let's just look at it how it looks on our bass neck. If I start on the third fret of A, my root is here, my third of the chord is my index finger on the D string, and then my pinky on the D string, or the next dot up on the D string is the fifth. Visually, it makes a triangle. So that's another way that sometimes people use to relate the shape of the major scale. It makes a triangle between the 3 notes, and each one of the notes is a point on the triangle. So once again, just to review, we have scale degree 1, 3, and 5. Or, when we start with our middle finger on the root, it makes this triangle shape. That's the major triad shape. So now, what we want to try and do is we want to come up with some ways of practicing this major triad. One of the most common things that happens with major triads is it won't just stay in one spot. We might take this major triad shape and move it around on our bass neck. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. We're going to look at a very basic way first, where we're just going to move the major triad shape up one string. And so what that means is we're going to play the same shape that we're playing starting on our A string. We're going to move all of our fingers up and start it on the D string. So let's stop for a second and talk about the frets that I'm playing for now, if that's another way of helping you learn it. I'm playing the third fret of the A string, or the first dot, the second dot of the D string, and the fifth fret of the D string. Sorry, I said second dot. Second fret of the D string, and then the fifth fret of the D string. So third fret of A, second fret of D, fifth fret of D. There's my first shape. All of those notes are going to move up one string when we play our second shape. So then this one's going to be third fret of D, second fret of G, and then fifth fret of the G string. I've got the two patterns that we're going to alternate between. Both major triads, but we're starting one on the A string and then one on the D string. The rhythm that I'm playing with this major triad right now is I'm playing 3 equal quarter notes and then I'm leaving a quarter note space before the next triad. This gives me a little bit of time to make the transition to the next triad. And we're going to play this together a few times in a row with the drum machine that I have over here, so this will kind of keep us in a little bit better time. And this pulse is at 50 beats per minute. And so this is a relatively slow pulse where our quarter note value is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I'm going to play along with this pulse, what I'll do is I will play root, third, fifth, then wait, root, third, fifth, then wait for the extra beat, root, third, fifth. So let's just do this for a while together. As I'm playing, I want to listen to the sound relationships of these major triads because they have a very specific sound that we've heard tons of times, and we want to associate that sound with major triad. The other thing, by putting it into a rhythmic phrase or by playing it in time, it's helping us work on combining the major triad with solid rhythm. And it's always a good idea to play things in time or with solid rhythm because as a bass player, we always want to make sure that we have really solid rhythm. So another thing you can consider as you're playing this and you're getting more comfortable with the shape is to try and count the quarter notes as you're playing it. So what I would count would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can tap your foot at that quarter note pulse. So every time I count a number, I'm tapping my foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it a couple more times, and then we'll look at another idea. So one more time. Alright, so another suggestion of practicing these major triads is right now we're doing them based off the same fret, but we're moving it up a string. Another way to work on them is to move them up and down the same string. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually start this time with our middle finger on the 7th fret of our D string. So the 7th fret, if you remember your dots, is the 3rd dot. So 1, 2, 3, middle finger, which is the root of the chord, middle finger on the D, index on the G, pinky on the G, gives me a major triad starting on the 7th fret of my D string. We haven't talked about notes so much in these lessons, even though it's a good idea to learn the notes on your bass neck, and as time goes on, hopefully you will start to learn those a little bit better. Just a thing to kind of keep in mind, whatever note I start my root on is the major triad that I am playing. So for example, I'm on the 7th fret of my D string. This note is an A. So when I play these 3 notes in combination, I'm playing an A major triad. So the next spot we're going to do is we're going to take this whole shape and move it down to the next dot down below that, the 5th fret or the 2nd dot on my D string. Same relationships. This note is G, so I'm playing a G major triad. If I move it down 2 more frets to the 1st dot This is an F, so this is an F major triad. So this sequence that we're going to play is going to be A major triad, G major triad, F major triad, and then we'll go back up and do G major again. The only reason why we'll do that is because we're going to make this a phrase where we have 4 triads that we're going to play, and most music is felt in groups of 4, so we're going to give ourselves an even phrase by playing 4 different major triad shapes. And obviously we're going to do this slower together with the drum machine, but just to give you a sense of what it would sound like a little bit faster and where you would like to maybe head with something like this. So I'm playing major triad on the 7th fret of D, 5th fret of D, 3rd fret of D, and then back up to the 5th fret of D, and then we're just going to repeat that phrase a few times in a row. Something to consider with your fretting hand: if you watch my hand as I shift my whole hand to the next position, and I think it's really important to try and do that rather than trying to shift one finger up and then shifting the rest of the hand to find it. A lot of times when people do that, they kind of lose their bearings a little bit, and they might lose where their position is for their triad. And obviously there's a big difference in sound between how to play the triad correctly and maybe if you accidentally got shifted down a fret or shifted up a fret. Very different sound than if we keep it within that 1 finger per fret shape. Okay, so let's do this example a few times in a row. The 4 major triad shapes starting on 7th fret of D, 5th fret of D, 3rd fret of D, and then we'll go back up and do another one on the 5th fret of D. So again, we'll do it at a slow tempo. This is again our 50 beats per minute tempo, and we'll play quarter notes on each note, and we'll hold an extra quarter note at the end of each triad before we change to the next one to give us a little bit of time to make that shift. So let's start together on this next one. So we'll go root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. Back to our first shape. One more time. So 7th fret of D, 5th fret of D, 3rd fret of D, and then back to the 5th fret of D. Cool, so again, just one suggestion of taking that major triad shape and moving it around a little bit. Right now we're doing it on spots where our root is always on a dot. One of the things I would encourage you to do is try to make the same shape starting on a fret that doesn't have a dot. A lot of times if you only work on frets that have dots, when you go to play it on a fret that doesn't have a dot, it might throw you off a little bit. And I always want to think about that idea of how does it look visually related to the dots too. So for example, if I play it starting on a dot, then that means my root is on the dot, my 3rd is not on the dot, and my 5th is on the dot. But if I take that shape and move it up 1 fret, then my root is not on the dot, my 3rd is on the dot, and then my pinky is not on the dot. So I always encourage, those dots are there to help you to keep your spot on your bass neck and to help you to make those visual relationships between your fingers and the frets on the bass neck. Okay, so to review what we talked about the major triad shape. Today we talked about it having a root, a third, and a fifth, or it's a 3-note chord, and the root, third, and fifth come from the major scale degrees. And the major scale degrees are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. So when I play root, skip the second, play the third, skip the fourth, play the fifth, that gives me a major triad. And this major triad shape can be moved around multiple places on our bass neck. And it's a good practice to work on moving it around. And right now, again, I'm using the same rhythm every time. You might want to experiment with changing your rhythms a little bit. Or you don't always have to play it in order of root, third, fifth. You can always combine different patterns, root, fifth, root, third, or root, 5, 5, 5, root, third, or the patterns are endless, and it's really up to your imagination to come up with ones that work well for you. Always consider, though, you want to make sure that whatever you are playing, try to make it feel as good as you possibly can, or try to always make it feel like it has a consistent pulse and a consistent rhythm. But major triads are great to know, and again, they're used so much that if once you get that pattern down, that pattern will always give you that major triad shape. With all my lessons, you probably have gotten used to me saying that there are multiple ways of playing these things. There are multiple ways of playing the major triad too, and as we go on in our lessons, we'll look at some other ways of playing it. But just again, to give you just the kind of beginning shape, this is the beginning universal shape of a major triad, and anytime I do this shape, it's going to give me that major triad. And it's a great way to start working on using your pinky too, because I know a lot of people shy away from that pinky because it's your weakest finger, but I think that you might as well use all the fingers that you have, and it helps because then you can play a lot of ideas in a small space without having to shift your fingers around. And again, the fingerings are just a suggestion, and there are plenty of times where I play major ideas where I use some different fingerings and I move my hand around a little bit, and I'm not just using that pinky, but in theory, in practice, I want to always try and be consistent with those fingerings. All right, I hope that lesson helped, and I will see you again next time. All right, thanks a lot.